Je m'appelle Frédéric Lori et vous écoutez Les coulisses de l'art. Dans les coulisses de l'art, on déambule avec la commissaire Lori Beavis. Lori nous a conviés avec son invité, l'artiste autochtone Jobena Petonoquot, à nous rejoindre à la Galerie Fofa à l'université de Concordia. Lori Beavis est la directrice du centre d'art Daphné. Commissaire et conservatrice et historienne de l'art, elle articule son travail sur la narration et la mémoire dans le contexte de l'histoire familiale et culturelle. Elle est détentrice d'un doctorat en éducation des arts de l'université de Concordia et s'identifie comme d'ascendance Mississauga, Mississauga-Anishinaabe et irlandaise galloise, et est membre de la Première Nation de Yawata de Rice Lake en Ontario. Tout au long de notre entretien, vous entendrez le caractère bilingue de notre métropole à travers nos échanges qui seront majoritairement en anglais. Vous aurez aussi le privilège d'entendre nos invités se présenter dans la langue de leur communauté respective.
Nous tenterons aussi de comprendre les enjeux actuels qui se posent pour les artistes et acteurs du milieu des arts en tant qu'autochtones. Étant autochtones, nous ferons de notre mieux afin de prononcer correctement les noms sans trop écorcher les oreilles averties.
Nous voilà arrivés à l'université Concordia. On est au bâtiment EV, au 1515 Sainte-Catherine-Ouest. C'est un bâtiment qui est immense, d'ailleurs au pied du métro Guy Concordia. On se déplace, on nous a donné rendez-vous à la Galerie Fofa, qui est une galerie universitaire avec une programmation extrêmement riche. D'ailleurs une galerie qui oriente beaucoup sa programmation vers un art autant inclusif, genré, avec des différents artistes qui proviennent de la diversité, des Premières Nations, évidemment une sélection d'artistes très émergents, parce que beaucoup d'entre eux sont soit au niveau du baccalauréat ou de la maîtrise. J'ai deux femmes d'exception qui nous attendent, Lori Beavis et Jobena. Donc nous voilà arrivés. Bonjour. Bonjour. Hello, Lori.
Hello.
Hello, Jobena.
Hi.
How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Oh yeah, what a nice place.
Yes, thank you.
I love that place, and I'm coming here very often because there is the programmation is so rich, and every time I'm discovering new talents.
Exactly.
But why did you ask me to come here to see you?
Well, I have great affection for the Fofa Gallery. I'm a Concordia alumni, and so and also my sister was one of the first director of the Fofa Gallery as well when it first opened in 2007 or something. But so I used to do the catering here as well. But I suppose most importantly, my first exhibition that I co-curated with Rhonda Meir was here at this space. And so it was just really wonderful that they gave me the opportunity to put a show that I'd sort of dreamt about over a few years in this space. And the day that we hung the Shelley Nero piece on that wall was just the greatest moment. So and I always like coming by because it's also always really vibrant, and there's always really, you're absolutely right, there's always new work happening, and you know, it can be different, and it can be sort of, because it's both student work and graduate student work, and then also faculty can be in here as well. So, and alumni can put shows in as well. So it's very rich, and I love the fact that the vitrines can be, you know, you can walk back and forth and see what's happening in the vitrines if this space is closed. So there's lots of really good reasons.
That's an amazing place. I love it. How do you introduce yourself to someone who doesn't know you? I know it's not an easy question.
That's a terrible question. I usually tell people I'm Lori Beavis. I'm at the moment I'm the director of Centre d'Art Daphne, but I'm also an independent curator. So I've got my own practice with that. I'm a Mississauga Anishinaabe person on my maternal family side, and I'm Irish and with Welsh and British heritage on my father's side of the family, I sort of always talk about the fact that there's both sides of my identity come together, and because I always think it's really important to talk about both Anishinaabe history and the settler history and the way that those two groups of people have come together, and certainly, so that's it.
Yeah. You're an independent curator before, and you still are an independent curator, but you took care of the direction of Daphne Center. Can you describe what that means, who you were working with, and what was the artistic direction?
Okay. Yes, I'm the first director of the Centre d'Art Daphne. Daphne is an Indigenous artist-run centre in Tiohtià:ke in Montreal, and I applied for the job and had a really interesting interview process. I knew many of the people who are the co-founders of Daphne, and so the interview was like going and having a conversation with friends about how they sort of envisioned this space and then what I could bring to that space, and it was a wonderful experience to get hired for that. And then of course I got hired just as the pandemic was happening, and so that sort of changed the focus in terms of what we could do and how quickly we could do things. And so the artistic focus is that we are an exhibition center. We exhibit contemporary Indigenous art, and that is solely the mandate. But we work with people at all levels of their career as well. So whether emerging, mid-career, and established artists, our objective is also to sort of showcase and bring forward work by artists who are living and working in Quebec. Of course, and we're going to experience this today, but the sort of the two languages of Quebec have an impact on how artists are known in this province itself, and how groups of people may or may not be able to even talk to one another because of the colonization of language. And so there's that, but then also sort of looking at artists outside of the borders of Quebec as well, to the east and to the west, and then bringing artists and curators into this province and into Tiohtià:ke, with the intention that we'll start new conversations there, and then also by bringing curators here, we're hoping that they'll meet artists here and then take them to other places across the country as well. So.
Le Centre d'art autogéré Daphné a été fondé le 1er avril 2019 par Anna Klaus, Nadia Mir, Caroline Monet et Skawenati, 4 artistes Anishinaabe et Ganyengéaga, établis à Montréal. Elles entretiennent des liens à la fois avec les communautés autochtones urbaines, leurs familles et leurs territoires respectifs. Le nom du centre a été choisi en l'honneur de Daphne Ojik, une artiste Anishinaabe qui a aussi mis sur pied un centre d'artistes autochtones autogéré à Winnipeg en 1971.
You invited Jobena, and I'm very, very pleased to see you today. And there were many natural connections between you. You are both Anishinaabe and Irish. You studied at Concordia, and your work focuses on identity, indigenous values, and memory. How did you first meet, and through what project?
Well, we met through Mike Patton at BACA, who works at Art Mirror.
Mike Patton est un artiste basé à Montréal et membre de la Première Nation Zagimé Anishinaabeg en Saskatchewan, et il est directeur de la Biennale d'art autochtone de Montréal. Ce rendez-vous d'art contemporain a été initié par la Galerie Armure à Montréal.
Jobena had been a residency at the Musée des Beaux-Arts, and it was through. She was also going to be given an exhibition at the Conseil des Arts de Montréal, and so she needed a curator. And so Mike introduced us, and we met on a very hot day in August. And she came with like bags and suitcase full of things, and put them all this beautiful work out on my dining room table, and we've just been talking to each other ever since. And that was in the summer of 2018, and so we curated an exhibition called
Rebellion of
My Ancestors, thank you. And so we did it there, and we've done it at the Dawson College and the Warren Flowers Gallery, and then we did it again this past summer in 2022. So, and then Jobena's also put work into some of the exhibitions, other exhibitions that I've done too. So,
Yes, Jobena, I had the pleasure of discovering your work at the First Nation Art Biennale at the Armure Gallery. And also at Art Souterrain Festival. Can you tell us about your artistic approach for those who don't know you yet?
Well, actually, my main goal as an Indigenous female contemporary artist is to become a human being. So a lot of the times this comes from I have a background in art history. So what I learned about academic texts that have been written about us and art that has been made that were by people who were not Indigenous. And it's very damaging to our identity because it doesn't establish anything that is actually real. It was actually imagined. So for me as an artist, I have the power to create my own future with my art. And I use beauty as a weapon to do it because I noticed that over my time as an artist that beauty is a way to entice the viewer to look upon Canadian history which may not be so pretty. So through the medium of photography, beadwork, and printmaking, I'm telling my stories, but from my own Indigenous perspective and that's a very important affirmation because I don't intend to speak for my people. And the reason why I don't speak for my people is because we're all so different. So I want to establish basically humanity. So that's what I'm about, yeah.
And today, what's the place of art and culture within the natives communities in Quebec?
I know for myself as an artist, I know that there is an upsurge of interest in Indigenous contemporary art than there had been, let's say, 10 years ago when I was doing my bachelor's at Concordia. So I feel like I think it might have a lot to do with the discovery of unmarked graves and a lot of political things that are happening between Indigenous people and the government, and people are starting to care. So I think a lot of things have changed in the past 10 years because I remember when I was studying here in art history at Concordia, I would apply to art shows and they wouldn't exactly give me a reason why they didn't want to exhibit it. They would say, oh, it's too big. Or they wouldn't give me a reason why. And then there were these prints that I did with Art Souterrain, still drinking tea with the Queen. And I had done that during my undergraduate studies at Concordia. And now this work, there's so much interest in this work right now. It's even part of the permanent collection of the Indigenous Arts Center in Gatineau. So I think it just shows that there has been a change of what people are currently interested in.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And what is the main difficulty for a First Nation artist nowadays?
What is the main difficulty?
Yes.
I think that, I don't really have any difficulties with speaking my mind as an artist, but I find that when I was a bachelor's student at Concordia, I was very proud of my identity, and I just started learning in art history about Indigenous issues with residential schools and colonialism and genocide, and that's not something that I learned in high school because everything that from in school is mediated, and the only time you're going to learn about that is in university. So I was learning new things, and I would talk to other students who are not Indigenous, and they'd be like, oh, well, why are you telling me this? I didn't do it to you. And then that's when I became very interested in making art that would entice people to look upon Canadian history that's so ugly, because I find that if you make art that's too aggressive, it's very off-putting. So I found a way I know how to fight, and I do it in a very gentle but powerful way. So I found a way to talk to people in a way where they're not going to feel intimidated or offended by what I'm saying, but it's still going to touch them. And I know people are touched by my work because they tell me that. So that's my thinking on that.
I think it's also really interesting that one of the things about Jobena's work and other people's and sort of that's where I come from in the curatorial work that I do as well, is that, you know, one of the things that we always talk about when we talk about Jobena's work is that she's telling families' histories and family stories that she's heard through her entire life, and that's often sort of a way to enter into art as well. And it's also absolutely right. The work is so beautiful. It draws people in, and then sort of whether it's a pair of moccasins or a beaded medicine bag, there's stories embedded in that work that Jobena is telling, but it's also a way for people to sort of learn about colonialism, learn about the impact of the church and how they sort of entered into the sort of the colonization of this country as well. And, you know, I always say, it's slightly pat perhaps, but, you know, looking at art and talking about art and talking to an artist about their work is always just a really, really good way to enter into learning more about the social and political and historical issues. And, you know, because you're looking at something and you can decipher it in your own way, but having a conversation, and that's one of the things we always talk about at Daphne as well, is like bringing people together so that we can have conversations and take these conversations further also. And so there's just like, there's so many layers in the work that's being made by Indigenous artists and contemporary practices at this point in time, that it's just a really rich period. And so that's, you know, so it's great that, you know, Jobena's here, and we've got work in, you know, other exhibitions are happening all over the city at this moment, which is really amazing, and people need to go look at it.
Yes. And do you think there is a danger that First Nation artists create to meet the international contemporary art market and remain integrated with their roots?
I don't think it's difficult to remain integrated in my roots, because part of the way I view the world is I take things around me and I use them. Because before the colonizer came to Canada, colonized our people, and basically committed genocide, we were always taking things that around us and using them to make art. My background is in art history. That's what I have a bachelor's in. I'm currently an MFA student here at Concordia in fiber arts, and I always say to people, I'm an amalgamation of everything that I've ever encountered. So I take art history, I take something that's known as academic and accepted as relevant, and I take the stories of my ancestors, and I can do classical art, and I can also make traditional art, and I juxtapose them together because it only makes sense that we've encountered non-Indigenous people. We're going to use whatever they have because it's basically telling my story. And that only makes sense because it's part of my identity now. So I don't think there's any difficulties.
Thank you very much, Jobena, for sharing your approach and your vision. Your words help me to better understand the reality of natives artists and their issues, or opportunities, let's say opportunities than issues. And now what we could do, we could go have a last question to Lori before we we take the car and go to another place, to a Maison de la Culture.
Yes.
So I was wondering, how can the education community be a vehicle for change in understanding First Nation people?
Well, I know that right now I'm studying Indigenous futurisms, and I think that using the internet and using social medias is a great way to educate and maintain culture, because we're using it as a mechanism to maintain our culture and to show that we're not sublimated in the past as art history and academics make us out to be, and we can use technology to maintain our culture in a very big way because it's very global. So that's very powerful. Yeah.
And Lori?
And I think one of the things that's happening is that like, again, we're going to talk about Concordia like there's no other university in the city, but the thing is that there are more and more Indigenous people coming into faculty as well, which makes a huge difference, and that's a way to draw in the next generation of students as well, and everything in terms of also, again, going back to Daphne, but we're working really hard to sort of think about how we can mentor and how we can bring in the next generation of cultural workers as well, and that's a sort of form of education also. So that's really important, because we need to sort of keep cultivating the next generation. To speak more specifically about education, I think that non-Indigenous kids, students are super interested and really, really want to know about the histories. I think that the finding the 215 in Kamloops and the residential school grounds at Kamloops in May of 2021 was a huge moment, and it was a horrible and devastating moment. But I just think that it was a wake-up call to a lot of people. I think teachers from that point onwards were starting to think about how they could integrate more of this information into their curriculum. There is the point at which there's always been thinking about Indigenous people as people who are no longer with us or situated in the past. There's more and more understanding that people are still present, people are making amazing art, they're doing amazing things in all different professions and that sort of thing too. So the presence is there, and I think it's been building and building really just actually from the last 10 years. But I think I think the momentum is coming also now from younger students and their parents, and who really want to sort of understand the history and of this country, and that's phenomenally important. And it's also, I'm super appreciative of the fact that the work that teachers are doing and really wanting to sort of put that material out there and put it into their curriculum.
On constate qu'un événement d'une noirceur et d'une tristesse, tel que la découverte de centaines de sépultures anonymes d'enfants autochtones à Kamloops, en Colombie-Britannique, puisse avoir des retombées positives. Les Canadiens ont ouvert les yeux sur les atrocités commises envers les peuples autochtones. Cela a engendré une série de mesures financières et de lois gouvernementales visant à reconnaître les Premières Nations.
Let's take a ride with Sandra and Mathis. And we go in which district?
So we have to go. So it's on Ontario at Frontenac. It's the Maison de Culture Frontenac, now called Janine Sutto.
Bon, la voiture se trouve juste en face. C'est parti pour la Maison de la Culture Janine Sutto. Tout le monde est bien installé? Non, il nous reste Mathis.
Ça y est.
Parfait.
Wow, super moteur. Stationnement est convoité.
Okay, I have a couple questions. So do you think that Quebec preserves sufficiently and protects our cultural foundations?
You do realize that you're talking to an Anglophone, right?
Yes.
But I don't feel that it's. there is recognition of the fact that there are 11 nations in this province, and I think that that's good. I just actually saw on television the other night like a really beautiful commercial about the fact that there are people still here and that there are 11 nations, and so that's really, really interesting. Certainly, you know, the Conseil des Arts de Montréal has an Indigenous program, and as does the Calc, recognition in English and the Calc, and so you know there is funding available, and it is still in a position where they're sort of still catching up a little bit, because traditionally Indigenous people have been underfunded, and I really can only speak to the arts funding and programming, but you know, I think that I feel for Daphne that and any time that I've applied for funding, I've been 99% successful. So I do think that the funding is available, and I do think that the support is there. In the wider public, it's, you know, and in the wider government, it's, you know, they always have other priorities than the arts and culture anyway. You know, and Daphne is in a slightly strange position because we don't align ourselves as a tourism venue, you know, a site for tourism. In you know, it's lovely when people from France or anywhere else, or England or wherever, come in and visit us because they do want to see what's happening in terms of contemporary Indigenous art. But we're not, you know, because often tourism is oriented towards having people go to powwow and things like that. And you know, don't get me wrong, I love powwow. I love my powwow weekends. But so we're in a slightly sort of funny position as an arts institution at Daphne in terms of sort of how we position ourselves. But I can just say that I do feel that we are, in terms of the arts, we are quite well supported, and we can always have more money. That would be lovely. So, if anybody's listening, that'd be great.
And as a native woman and artist, what do you think about this foundation, and about the future of this foundation?
I believe that it's a beginning, and every time that I've applied for a grant, I've never been refused. But it's probably because I'm doing good work, and they want to see my work. And I think that I take the initiative by maintaining my own culture and establishing my own identity and future as an artist. So I think there's a lot, you have to take a lot of ownership as a First Nations person to maintain your own culture. So yes, there is, like Lori was saying, there's a lot of funding available for us, and we just have to apply for these grants, because to be honest, a lot of First Nations artists don't know about these grants. Like I admit that I'm a rather new artist. I've only became professional in 2018. So I only knew about those grants later in life, and I do know that if not enough people apply for these grants, they may not be available. So I think that Quebec is helping in a way, but I think to know about them, like I think it's mostly artists that live in the city that know about these grants, because when I lived on my reservation, I have no access to museums or galleries. Yeah, so, yeah.
And how could be done to increase the number of artists, and also increase the number of grants from artists from all the different reservations?
I think probably maybe create workshops, or have people enter the communities and actually maybe give a short course about applying for these grants, because I've applied for grants myself, and I'm very lucky that they said yes to me every time. But then there's some people who aren't so good at writing. It may be a language barrier. So I think that having workshops for them and just putting the information out there, because even when I applied to the Impressions Artist Residency wasn't an exclusive Native residency. I think it was for all artists. But I think I wouldn't have known about that residency if it hadn't been for my friend who lives in Montreal. She said, Jobena, I think you should apply for this. And I was like, okay. I'm like, I didn't think I was gonna win, because I knew, she saw what I was doing on social media, because I was always posting my work all the time. But when I won, I was like so surprised. And I remember speaking to Geneviève Goyer, we met. She used to work at the Montreal Museum. She's my mentor and friend. And she says, you don't seem excited. I'm on the phone and I'm like, oh, I'm just really shocked. I'm like, yeah. So that's how I got started as an artist, and that's how I met Lori.
Was art at the center of your families?
No. I think, but interestingly, my parents lived in a very small town when I was born, and for 5 years that I was alive, and there was a woman who lived next door who painted these kind of sort of faux group of 7 paintings, So she was the artist, and we had one of her paintings on the wall of our house, and which I was always really interested in. But then I can also, I also know, and I very sheepishly remember that, I went into high school and I didn't. The teacher started talking about the group of 7, and I didn't know who it was, and I was like super embarrassed that I didn't know who that group of 7 were. And if only I'd known it was like the Indian group of 7, that would have been so much more interesting, right? But just to sort of think about, that my parents were always super encouraging, though, of anything. And when I came home, I went and lived in England for a year after high school, and I came home and I said, I want to do an art history degree, because of sort of a friend had said, and then he introduced me to art history, and they were like, okay. And so then we came for a summer holiday vacation, and we came to Montreal, and I said, well, this is where I'm going to come, is to Concordia. So they were always just super supportive, and they didn't have any problem with the fact that I wanted to go into the arts or anything like that. So, married a person who's an artist as well, and an art historian, and so it's so it was. I think it was bound to be, actually. So.
And what about you, Jobena?
Well, my grandfather was an amateur photographer, but he wasn't an artist, but he loved taking photos of nature. And my great aunts, during the Victorian period, had made these mailboxes made out of birch bark. And my cousin has the archival photos, but he said that we never thought of it as art because it was something that they did, and also it was utilitarian, but a lot of Native art is also utilitarian. So there's not many beadworkers in my family. My grandmother had 13 children. She didn't have time to do beadwork. But I had encouragement from my mother, who she's not a professional artist, but she loves to draw. She's very creative and very smart. So she always encouraged me to do what I was good at. As long as I was going to school and I wasn't getting into trouble, I could study art. So that's how I ended up studying art history, and then now I'm a studio art student, which is really interesting because I never thought I would do that. Yeah.
And what triggered you towards an artistic career? You two want to start?
Well, I always loved the arts, and when I was a child, I loved to sing. I liked to pretend, I liked to act, and my mom noticed that in me, and she noticed that she knew that I was gonna do something in the arts. She just didn't know what. So it all started when I went to Cégep and I was studying communications, and I took photography, and I realized that I was really good at photography. I was doing very well because I loved it. And then when I applied to Concordia, I was studying, my major was art history with a minor in photo, and I took other studio art classes to satisfy my funding. So it was more like I did a double major. So I also took fiber arts, and I didn't know I was a fibers artist. I didn't think that it was something that you could study because it's something that I did, but I didn't know there was a name for it. So that's how I ended up in the fiber arts program, and I also established myself as an artist before doing my master's. I've done a lot of art shows, and I'm in a lot of museum and gallery collections way before my master's, which people are surprised because she's like, aren't you supposed to get your master's first? I'm like, I don't know. I don't do anything right. I'm like
don't do anything in the right order.
Yeah, so I'm doing my master's now, and I feel really good about it, and I feel good where I am, and everybody's very nice at Concordia, and I'm still working as an artist. I'm still selling my work. I'm still doing shows, and I'm going to school.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
And Lori?
Well, I think I was always, I guess, to sort of go back, I'm not an artist. I sort of dabble in things a little bit, but I don't consider myself an artist. And I've, that sort of classic thing of not being the sort of the will to, or the wanting to make something is stronger in your mind than in what you're actually capable of doing. So that's where I draw the line in terms of my own art practice. But I've always been interested in art. I'm super interested in art education, and I've done lots of art teaching as well. I think, and I've always, one of the things that happened, I grew up in Peterborough, Ontario, and Art Space, the Artist-Run Centre, was one of the early artist-run centres in Canada, and it was a really good sort of formidable place. I think formidable is the right word, but because it gave me a chance to sort of go into this art space that was just really interesting and completely sort of outside of anything that I knew from my family also. And then, as I said, I was a year in England, and I had a friend who sort of was very interested in art history and arts, and so he encouraged me to go into art history, and there was that. And then my sister did an arts administration course, and I had children instead, and so then I was always sort of around the artist-run centers that she was running, and as I said earlier, I often did the food for those openings and things like that. So, but I always also had really good ideas for shows, but I never actually curated anything either. And so then the way that I came into curation, I guess, is because I did, when I was doing my doctorate, I went and I talked to 4 contemporary women artists and about their cultural experience and art experiences across their lifetime, cultural identity and art experiences, and I went to, one of the people that I went to visit was Shelley Nero, Mohawk Haudenosaunee artist in Brantford, Ontario, and I walked into and sat in her kitchen, and as she was making coffee, I was looking at all of this amazing iconic art that was on the wall, and the piece that was there was the Rebel Yells, and I thought, oh my God, we need to have an exhibition. I need to make an exhibition based on this one piece of art that just has had such a pivotal role in the way that people represent themselves as Indigenous people. And I don't know if you know the work, but it's her mother across the back of a car in a sort of sexy, coquettish kind of pose on the back of this sort of beat up old car. I can send you the photograph, actually, the image. And so I just came back to Montreal, and I said to a friend, I really want to curate an exhibition, and you know how to do that, so can we do it together? And so then we just built this amazing exhibition in 2000 that took 2 years to put together, and went up in 2015. So and I've just been sort of like creating little exhibitions and bigger exhibitions since that time. So
step by step.
Step by
but
step.
But you jumped literally in this first
from
experience.
doing the food for openings to actually being the person who like created the opening. That's my trajectory.
If we go back, because I had a couple questions about the involvement of the Canadian government, and I was, as a French citizen, and I was, like I said, previously I was born and raised in France, and so there's so many things that I don't get, I don't have to understand the man portrait. I wanted to know, do you find the Canadian government efforts to recognize native cultures to be real and relevant?
That's a very difficult question, because I'm always very skeptical about the motives behind the government and in purchasing my work. And the content of my work is about misuse of religion and genocide and colonialism. And I always wonder, because I'm an Algonquin artist, I'm from Kitigan Zibi, Ottawa is my unceded territory. I wonder if there's a motive when the government does purchase my work. Why are they buying it? Is it to make themselves look good? I always have those questions of mistrust, but I'm of course I'm always honored whenever anybody wants to purchase my work, especially an institution. But at the same time, you have to think about the image they want to portray of themselves, and everything is always political all the time. So I'm like kind of on the fence on that. I don't really know how to respond to that, because it's questionable.
So you're still skeptical?
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, I'm a little skeptical. Yeah.
And what about you, Lori?
Can you say the question again? Sorry.
Yes. Do you find the Canadian government's efforts to recognize native culture to be real and relevant?
I think it's yeah, exactly. It's very subjective, and again, I think it ebbs and flows so much as well in the way that the government thinks about Indigenous people in this country. It fluctuates by who's in power. There's just so many issues. It's sort of funding comes and goes as well in terms of culture and the arts. That always changes as well. The one sort of thing that always stays as a constant, I hope this isn't a huge generalization, but is the performative. They really, the Canadian governments really like to sort of have the Indigenous people be performative, and so come out and perform their culture. And that's because it's that was established really early on as a way to sort of think about Canada. And so they've always made the most of that. And even during times when, cultural activities like dance and language were prohibited, they still wanted people to come out and dance for them, and in official situations. And so that was, there's always this sort of difficult dichotomy there, right? In terms of, can we or can't we? And so people were imprisoned and because they were sort of trying to live their cultural life, and so it's it's still always very difficult. And I think even the most recent Liberal government has been came in with a great desire to make change and build a new relationship with Indigenous people, and they're still having a pretty hard time to do it actually. So.
Je trouve particulièrement intéressant le point de vue de Lori, qui nous explique la dichotomie du souhait des gouvernements de vouloir voir les autochtones performer des danses traditionnelles pour lesquelles ils étaient autrefois passibles d'emprisonnement.
funding for the Canada Council has been really good. I guess that's the, sort of the one part of it is, and the Canada Council has done a really great job of like with the programming for creating, knowing, and sharing. And so there is again coming back to arts funding. That's a really positive outgrowth of this government. So.
And you think that's all this funding, all these programs are aligned with the native realities?
No, I can't really speak to that hugely, but I think that there's still a lot of people who are living, through the experience of trauma from the past, and art. I always say that art is a really good way to sort of come to sort of culture and healing, but there's still so much to do, and there's still so many people that are still really deeply hurt, and through past actions of the government, and we're never really going to get away from. It's going to take more generations to if that can ever be fixed.
Wow, you found a place.
And we're right there. This is amazing.
She's incredible.
It's awesome.
Yeah. There's an angel around the car, and
also an angel driving it.
Oh, yes, also.
Thank you. Thank you for getting us here.
Yeah.
Pleasure. Nous voilà arrivés. I should check an umbrella. My God. I didn't check the weather.
Oh, it's here.
Je vais laisser mon sac d'ailleurs dans le coffre.
Fin de la première partie.